All right, everybody, we're going to get started this morning. I want to thank you all for being here. My name is Eric Rogers. I help make Reclaiming South Shore for All work. I send out all the email blasts, so when you're annoyed by that, you know who's doing it. But I'm glad to see that we had such a great turnout. I think that as we look towards the elections next year, political engagement in this neighborhood is really crucial because we have a lot of problems that we need our elected officials to help us address. And we've got to start talking about that now so we have good people in place over the next couple of years. So we want to make a couple of announcements before we get started with the program. One of them is that some of you may have noticed Reclaiming South Shore for All, we did a logo design competition. And we are still finalizing the logo with the artist who designed it for us, but we wanted to unveil the draft. And so this will be our future logo. Because we wanted, going into the election year, we wanted to be recognizable as an organization. So we're really happy. This was designed by man Arthur Wright, who unfortunately wasn't able to be here this morning, but he's winning a $100 gift card, and he will be helping us touch it up a little bit before we come to it. So, congratulations to Arthur. The other thing I want to announce, many of you are probably already aware of the sort of fight that's brewing over the Urban Partnership Bank building at 71st and Jeffrey Boulevard. They want to tear it down and build a strip mall. And there's so many reasons to object to that. It's a historic building in its own right. That location is already congested. There's a train station right there, so a parking lot is stupid. And there's already a strip mall that's missing, at least a third of its tenants. So there's not demand for a strip mall. So pick your objection and then sign our petition objecting to it. So the strategy that we're engaging in with this, as you go along 71st Street, there's a really rich architectural stock of historic buildings from the 1920s and 1930s, including this one that we're in here. We want that to become a Chicago landmark district, sort of recognizing the history of South Shore, its development in the 20s as like a booming neighborhood. And then the sort of interesting, Jewish and then African-American history that has come through the neighborhood over the intervening years. So we will be leading a tour of 71st Street this afternoon, leaving from here at 1 p.m. It'll be about a 1-hour tour. It's in conjunction with Preservation Chicago, the South Shore Chamber, the South Shore Docent Council, and the South Shore Historical Society. So it's a big coalition effort. We're all coming together along with Reclaiming South Shore for All to try to save that building and to really, put some things in place to make sure that 71st Street can be brought back to being a more vibrant place. So I hope you all consider sticking around here for lunch. The chili is delicious. And then join us on the walking tour. So with that, Mia Henry will introduce our special guest this morning.
Thanks, Eric. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for coming out this morning, Saturday morning, and because you care about the future of Chicago. Reclaiming South Shore for All was formed about 2 years ago, I would say probably in my living room, after I had a couple break-ins in my house, actually. And instead of fleeing the neighborhood, I really wanted to see what we could do to strengthen the neighborhood and strengthen the community ties that we have with one another. So that's why we came together, and we are unincorporated, and hopefully we'll stay that way. So we're not a nonprofit, we're not a small business, we're not any of those things. We're just a group of concerned citizens that really want to make sure that South Shore holds its political officials accountable for visionary and present leadership, as well as want to support all the other great efforts that community members are doing around the neighborhood to make it a place that the residents can stay and thrive. So I want to recognize Val Free, who's here from the South Shore Planning Coalition. Yes. We're part of the South Shore Planning Coalition, which of course is working very hard now to strengthen the block clubs in the neighborhood, as well as try to figure out what we're going to do about our dominance that hasn't been replaced. So South Shore is challenged in a lot of ways, but there's just as many opportunities, and I know that I'm always very just happy to see people come out, because I know that you all are the fiber of the community, and that's why we stay, right? I want to give me some sugar. For not being afraid to host something that is not necessarily what everyone would be willing to host. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest this morning, Amara Enyia. This is part of a series that we hope to schedule for the rest of the year of political meetings, things just about the people who want to run for office to represent us. And so it's not, again, we're not a nonpartisan group, but we feel like people, absent of the privileges of incumbency, right? People need exposure. And so we thought it was really important. I was so happy to hear that Amara put her hat in the ring for mayor, and encourage, because this is what democracy is about, right? We need people on the ballot, competent people on the ballot, and so we can make informed choices. And so this series today, this event today, is part of a series of events that we want to do so we can make sure that South Shore residents can make competent choices. So Amara, I have your bio here, and I always look at it. I've known you for a little while now, and I always look at it and think, how can I cut this down? But I'm not going to cut it down. So stay with me, people. Amara Enyia serves as Chief Executive Officer of ACE Municipal Partners, LLC. Is a full-service municipal consulting firm that works with small and mid-sized cities in the Chicago, Northwest Indiana area, also in Central America, South America, and Africa. She's also the founder and lead author of the blog, The Municipal Maven, which features the intersection of politics, policy, and the public through the lens of municipalities. Dr. Enyia leverages years of municipal government experience in several policy areas, including economic development, education, public safety, housing, food security, and food access, as well as community development, business development, workforce development, public-private partnership structuring. She has worked as an educational researcher, evaluator, and policy advocate, led a nonprofit organization, and worked extensively in advancing manufacturing sector around large-scale development projects, workforce development, community-driven economic development. Dr. Enyia's work is informed by extensive international experience via years spent traveling to every continent and studying municipalities comparatively. She leverages her knowledge locally, working with community groups and organizations in Chicago's most challenged community, especially on the South and West sides. Dr. Enyia writes extensively on the issues of community and economic development, public policy, and systems thinking. She received a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism, political science, and news editorial with concentrations in history and philosophy. She also received a law degree focusing on international law, development, as well as contract and negotiations. She holds a master's degree in education and received a PhD in educational policy studies, where she specialized in evaluation methodology. She's fluent in Igbo, Spanish, French, and Portuguese, and maintains reading and writing proficiency in Italian. Wow. So, bienvenidos. Welcome, Amara Enyia. Good morning, everyone.
Yes.
I'm going to cut it down, or Mia will have my bio memorized, I think, a couple more times. Thank you for having me here. Thanks to Give Me Some Sugar for hosting this event. Thanks to Mia. Mia is someone that I was introduced to, I think, last year. And I saw her bio and some of the things that she was involved in, and I felt like I needed to step my game up. Just doing great work. One of the embodiments of the kind of leadership that we need in this city. People who are on the ground doing the work. They're not doing it for the cameras or for the press. They're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And so much respect. Thank you so much. And thanks for all of you for coming out on your Saturday on this beautiful, almost warm Saturday to hear me talk. I'm keenly aware that for a lot of people, I am the crazy black woman that decided she wants to challenge Rahm Emanuel. And I've noticed that people don't quite know what to expect until they actually see me in person. And so I want to just give a little bit of context to who I am, but I do want to spend the majority of the time getting the hard-hitting questions that I'm sure most of you have put together and prepared for this meeting, for this gathering.
So first and foremost, I'm the daughter of immigrants from Nigeria. I'm one of 6 children. My parents were activists, and so I always start my story with my parents' story because they were very much involved, and I learned from them. That's how I got into this work. So my father fought in our civil war. We had a civil war in Nigeria. There was a genocide taking place in 1967. He enlisted in that war. He was 21 years old. My mother was a frontline nurse in that war. And when I asked my father years later about why at 21 in the prime of life he would enlist in this war, at the time Nigeria was being supported by the US, by the British, by the Germans, by all these European powers who were fighting against having an independent black country. And he told me that it wasn't necessarily because our people were being killed, the Igbo people. He said it was because he just couldn't stand oppression. So it was around principles. It was these issues of principles. That at 21 years old, he felt so strongly that he was willing to risk his life for that cause, my mother as well. After that war, they didn't win. Things were very bad in the country. We had a number of dictators. And so my parents continued their work against the government. They came to the United States where they could easily have said, now that we've gotten to America, let's forget about what's happening in Nigeria, let's just continue, raise our family here, and that's it. Instead, they continued to fight against the dictators here. They organized in Chicago, in the state, and also across the country against the government, against corruption, against the anti-democratic forces that were alive and well at the country at that time. And they risked their lives even here. It was to the point where the government was sending people to our home when we lived out in the suburbs to intimidate and threaten our parents because of their activism. And yet they continued to do it because it was the right thing to do, because of those principles. And so that's my legacy. So I come out of that. I grew up with that. Where principles are important, where principles matter, and where it's not, you don't do things for convenience, you do things because they're the right thing to do. And we have to be willing to make sacrifices for advancing a just cause. And so that's how I got into this work of community and economic development. To a lot of people, it might seem that I was down in Champaign. I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana. Yes, there's always one in every crowd, so I always decided to say that. But I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana, and for me, the education is a tool. So you're supposed to use it as a tool for a certain end. So I don't believe, contrary to what it might seem, that in just collecting degrees left and right. It's too expensive for that anyway. But for me, I was seeing some things that didn't sit well with me. And so the reason why I got into journalism was because I wanted to understand people's stories and be able to tell people's stories, people who did not have a platform to speak or to explain who they were. The other thing that I was seeing was a lot of issues around education inequity. For us, our parents had stressed education because they felt that it was the best way for us to be upwardly mobile and to have a solid life in the United States. And yet, when I was in Central Illinois, I was seeing a school that had been reconstituted. In Chicago, they call it a turnaround. And I went to a board meeting. I was, I think, 18 years old at the time. And I saw teachers that were crying because they were all going to be fired. And they were going to bring in a whole new staff into this school, in the school district. And so at 18, I began to ask these questions of what was going on. Not only did the reconstitution bother me, but it was also the fact that when we looked at the disparity in discipline, the achievement gap, and all of these inequities that I began to see in the community. Even though I was an undergrad, I was a college student, and while most of my peers were, having fun, I was thinking about these issues. And so that's why I said journalism. It's why I went on to get my master's in education. I saw the law as a tool. We have to be able to use tools effectively to battle against the forces in this system that would seek to keep us powerless. And so for me, getting the law degree was a way of being able to have something tangible to use in advancing a just agenda. So that's how I went to law school. And again, going on into educational policy was how do we make sure that we have an educational system that is actually working in our interests, working on behalf of the communities, the children that come out of these communities, and how can we use that as a tool? So that was my lens. I always knew that I wasn't going to be an ivory tower academic. And so a lot of people thought that, oh, when you get your PhD, you'll just, you'll write articles, which is fine. But I always knew that I needed to be on the ground doing the work, applying everything that I had learned. And so for that reason, I went to work in City Hall. I worked in the mayor's office under Mayor Richard M. Daley. And because I knew that I had to have an understanding of how policy is made at the top level of city government. A lot of times we complain and we understand the issues as they affect us, but do we know how those decisions are being made, who's at the table when those decisions are being made, and what tools can we use to make sure that we change that system if it's not working in our favor? So that's what led me to working in City Hall, and it was a fantastic learning experience. It was eye-opening. A lot of the stereotypes about Chicago government and Chicago politics I learned were true. But it reinforced for me that there was a clear disconnect between those who make policy and those who are impacted by policy. And I found that my colleagues, when I was in City Hall, they talk to each other, and you think because you talk to each other so much that this is the universe, and yet there's a whole universe outside of City Hall with people who are living in their communities every day. And I knew that there was a disconnect there. And so for me, my next step was definitely going to be in the community. I knew that I had to get to the ground level. Now that I had an understanding of top government decision making, I knew that the work was needed in the communities. So I decided to go to the West Side. I went to Austin. And I went to Austin. Austin is the largest community in Chicago. It's the furthest west neighborhood. And if you look statistically, the number of foreclosures, the unemployment rate, just the public safety issues, there are a lot of issues there. But I went to Austin specifically because we rarely ever talked or engaged with the Austin community when I worked in City Hall. And so to be the largest community with the issues that that community was facing and to never talk about it in City Hall, I knew that that's where I needed to be, where the work is. That's always been my thing. I go where the work is. So I started working, I was leading a nonprofit in Austin. We were working with 150 other organizations, all saying that they work on behalf of the Austin community, trying to do community and economic development work, working around the schools. I was part of the community action councils, advocating against the school closings. I was working in manufacturing at the same time, trying to rebuild the middle class by getting individuals into these jobs that are available in the economy, and just doing all of that work. And I knew that I needed to expand, once I got into Austin, to other neighborhoods, because it just became very evident that there's so much work that needs to be done. So I expanded out, working in Austin, North Lawndale, West Humboldt Park, Little Village, and then I started working on the South Side in Roseland, doing some work in Inglewood, and basically going where the work needed to be. And so for me, running for office, this is not just about me, this woman that's challenging the mayor. The message that I'm bringing is about transformative change in the city, and it's actually about every individual in the city recognizing the power that you already have. I believe that if the system is not working, I just feel a responsibility to do everything possible to change it. And so for me, running for office, or running for mayor, it actually doesn't seem extraordinary. I know it from a qualification standpoint that I'm well qualified. I know that the issues that we face are very urgent. I don't think that we have a lot of time in the city at the rate that things are going. Particularly if you live in South Shore, if you live in Inglewood, if you live in Austin. There are forces that are at work and plans that have been in place for decades. And your futures are not secure here if we don't change course in a very drastic way. And so for me, there's a sense of urgency around the issues that we face, and that's why this upcoming election is so important. But I also think that we have responsibility to make sure that we have individuals who share our values that are being elected into office. So it's not just about the mayor, it's about all 50 of our aldermen, and making sure that we have leaders that reflect values of transparency, open government, of integrity, of equity in policy, and leaders that understand that their position is one of servanthood, that it's not to be in there for self-preservation, that we're blinded by the power or the title of being aldermen. They actually are there to serve their constituents. So until we decide that we're willing to break out of the status quo, that we are unafraid to challenge a system that is clearly not working in our interests, we're going to continue to see the decline that we've seen over the past few decades. We've already lost 250,000 residents, primarily from the South and West Side, in the last 10 years. And that number is not slowing down. So I think that we have a unique opportunity as a city to step outside of the box, to not be afraid to do things that are bold and courageous. And that means that we can't think that we're going to do things in the traditional way and get different results. So one question that's come up a lot for me, well, why didn't you run for alderman? Or why don't you spend 5 years in some other position and then work your way through and get this alderman to bless you and that? We're not going to get any different results if we have individuals that have already adopted the mindset of the status quo. So the first thing that we should be looking at is what are the values that drive leadership? What are the values that drive individuals who claim that they want to serve the public? What are their motives? If you're going through the usual channels, that means you've already adopted the mindset. So if I go and get the blessing of all of the aldermen, some of whom are not doing what they should be doing on behalf of their constituents, then I've already adopted the mindset and said that this system is okay. And so we cannot do that. But it requires us to not be afraid to step outside the box. It requires us to not be afraid or believe what I believe are the lies that the system would have us to believe, which is that we don't have power. I think we were all born with power. So we have it already. It's just a matter of us tapping into it. And when we do that collectively, that's how we have transformative change as a city. So that's my message. I think this is bigger than any one individual. It's bigger than me. And it requires all of us to collectively decide that we want something different for ourselves and ultimately for the city. So, thank you.
So we have time for some questions for Amara Enyia. So if you have a question, the way we'll do it is just whoever stands up first gets to talk, and then, you know, we'll do it that way, okay? So we have a, just stand if you have a question.
Feel so lonely up
here. Introduce yourself to everybody too before you answer.
My name is Don Watchanabe, and I moved to South Shore from the north side of 68. Okay, what's your strategy in putting together both your campaign as well as your value system?
Our strategy is people-driven. So for the campaign, we have to be out, and we are out in every community. We believe that the message is a unifying message. So we're saying that regardless of your socioeconomic status, regardless of your geography, regardless of your race or your ethnicity, that there is a better way for this city if we only unify. So we bring a unifying message to the city. But our strategy is that we're actually out in every community. There are 2,500, I think 2,500 precincts in the city, and we have bodies in our goal is to have bodies in every precinct of people who are talking about this message. We're knocking on doors. There are just certain things that you have to do. One thing that we do know is that in the last election, our current mayor didn't really have any ground game. He didn't really have to go out and actually knock on people's doors and talk to them about what he was about. He came in, and there was a lot of bluster for coming from the White House, and everyone just sort of said, oh, this is great, and that was it. And then he bought up all the media. So our strategy is one of engaging people and talking about our message, and they talk to other people about their message. And they're out in every community. So we're from the north side to the south side, west, to the lake. That's how we're going to mobilize people around this message and get them engaged in the community. The other thing that we're really focusing on is on voter education and voter registration. We know that the only way that this current mayor wins is if people don't come out to vote. So the last election, we had maybe 325,000 people voted. And so the only low voter turnout favors incumbents. And so there are so many groups who have been marginalized by the current leadership, both at the mayoral level, at the citywide level, but also in the wards, that we know that getting them registered and actually getting them out to vote on that day is critical. So that's the second part of our strategy, to make sure that we really increase voter turnout.
So I'd like to know what are your priority issues on your platform?
What's your name?
I'm sorry. I'm Dr. Delisha Kenny. I'm a photographer. I'm a I have, my training was at SIU School of Medicine, and I'm from Champaign, Illinois. I recently transplanted here. I'm getting my Master's of Public Health in May from Chicago State University, and I'm now in South Shore. So.
Oh, okay. Good to meet you. So my top priority issues, so education. I am a proponent of fully funded public neighborhood schools, first and foremost. That is absolutely critical. We have to make sure that we're fully funding our schools so that they have the resources that they need to be able to teach and so that students can learn. I support an elected school board. I think that we have, unfortunately, that the CPS needs a dose of democracy. Right now, CPS agenda is the mayor's agenda. And so what we see is a reflection of the mayor's priorities. So we need an elected school board to make sure that the decisions that come out of the school board are actually reflective of what the community wants, what the parents, teachers, and families who also live and work in the communities want based on what they know and have experienced. So definitely an elected school board. I think that it's wrong to create a dual education system. So this notion of closing down 50 schools in the communities, but at the same time reopening charter schools in some of those same areas, I think it sends the wrong message. I think we should halt the opening of charter schools until we decide what we actually want to do. I think we have to prioritize our neighborhood public schools because there's accountability there, and every school, every person should have access to a high quality school in their neighborhood. So I don't believe that we can create this dual education system, which is the track that we're on now, essentially privatizing our educational system to for-profit entities who are benefiting while our children and families and communities are suffering. So that's just a snapshot around education. And some of the other issues that are tangential to that is this issue of testing. I don't believe that testing, over-testing is effective. It's bad education policy. And for those who are in education, we know what works. The problem is that we end up doing, the city ends up doing what's politically expedient instead of what's actually sound from an education policy standpoint. So over-testing is just bad education policy. It tamps down on the enthusiasm of students and creates a much more stressful learning environment where they're actually not learning, they're just being tested. And so we see that happening in so many schools in this city. I also think we need a curriculum that actually develops well-rounded individuals, not just test takers. So we need our students coming out prepared for life after their school. They need to be not just college ready, but they need to be career and workplace ready. And that's something that the mayor is fond of saying, that we want 100% college bound, or 100% college ready, 100% college bound. I think that's unrealistic. In the economy in which we live, that we have a variety of options for students when they leave high school. They should be either ready to go to college, they should be ready to work in some place with skills, or they should be ready to do both if that's what they want to do. So those are, from an education standpoint, those are my top priorities. From a financial standpoint, I believe in being, we cannot be beholden to the financial sector. So I believe that as a way of generating revenue for the city, the proposal of having a financial transaction tax, which is a tax on financial transactions in the market, so CME. That tax alone could generate billions of dollars in revenue, at least $2 billion of revenue for the city. The reason why we haven't done it yet is because our current mayor has too many ties in the financial community to take that step. But I don't believe that we can continue to plug our budget shortfall on the backs of middle income and low income residents, those of us who can least afford it. We can't continue to pay our taxes, but we're afraid to ask our partners in the financial sector to pay their fair share of taxes. So I also support our corporate partners paying their fair share of taxes. Right now, we give tax breaks. And a lot of times, some of those corporations don't necessarily create jobs for people who live in the city. And yet they're not paying into the city's coffers. So if we're really serious about making sure that we have revenue, we've got to make sure that our corporations pay their fair share of taxes. We also have to close corporate loopholes, and I propose the financial transaction tax for additional revenue. I also am, from an economic standpoint, I talk a lot about investment, and this is both economic, but it also gets to the public safety issue. I think that there are communities that have been ignored for decades in this city. And so one of the latest things that have come out was around public safety, where it was revealed that our police superintendent has been manipulating data so that the crime rates look lower than they are. And so for me, that is a testament to the quality and the values of our leadership. That they are more interested in painting a pretty picture than in actually addressing the roots of the issues of violence, the root cause of violence, because violence is actually a symptom of many things, particularly poverty. And so when people are in their communities and they can't find work, they can't sustain themselves, or they can't sustain their families, of course they will look to other options to be able to do that. When we close down, for example, mental health clinics, so those individuals cannot get access to the resources that are necessary for their survival, we're sending a message. When we don't invest in human capital, we don't invest in, for example, the park district, so that we can make sure that our kids have extracurricular activities to do when they're outside of school or during the summer. We don't invest in youth employment. We don't even invest in adult employment, particularly in our communities. How are we intentionally attracting businesses to communities on the south and west side at the same rate that we do to attract businesses in the central business district, downtown? We need a comprehensive jobs program that creates jobs for individuals who already work and live in the city. So the current strategy is we attract headquarters that come into the city, and we tout how great it is that this new headquarters has come into the city, and yet every employer or every employee drives in from the west suburbs and north suburbs for those jobs. Meanwhile, we have, at least in my community, on my street, I see the guys every day who want to work and can't find work. So we actually have to target the sectors that made Chicago strong. We are not Manhattan. Chicago is a manufacturing city. It was built on transportation. We are a national transportation hub. There are jobs in that sector that go unfilled, thousands of jobs, only because we don't have individuals that are qualified or have been trained in those sectors to work. And these are low barrier to entry jobs, so they don't require a degree or a PhD or anything like that. And so until we actually invest in creating pipelines into those sectors, manufacturing, transportation, health, we're going to continue to see the unemployment rate be what it is. And our economy will not continue to grow because we can't take a strategy of attracting headquarters. That can't be how we develop our economy in this city. And so from an economic standpoint, a lot of what I talk about is investing in human capital, intentionally attracting businesses and development to communities that have long been ignored, and making sure that we're investing in workforce so that we have a high-quality labor force, and that's actually an attractive feature for a company to locate here. And so along with that and the public safety issue, it is also an issue of investment. And until we decide as a city that we're interested in actually addressing the issues and not just doing what looks good or putting up a picture that we know, those of us who live in the community every day know is not the case, we're going to continue to see the numbers be what they are. So that's a top priority issue for me as well. And they're across the board. Open government hearings before the budget has been passed. More than 24 hours notice to actually see what's in it. Opening up, I believe in opening up our cabinet level meetings to the public. I think we could stream them live. So if you want to know how decisions are being made, well, you'll see us around the table when we're talking about it. As opposed to we just make these pronouncements after the fact and then hope that there's no backlash. I believe that we should be in every community. You should actually see your mayor and not just on 8-week documentaries. So we should be in every ward. We should have town halls. You should actually be able to hear directly from your mayor on a regular basis. After all, he's the mayor of Chicago, not the mayor of Hollywood.
Hollywood, right.
Exactly. So from an open government and transparent government standpoint, those are some other priorities that I have.
I was going for coffee, but
Go ahead.
I'll wait my turn.
Your platform seems to be more about the underserved or minorities in the community in Chicago, neighborhoods that have a lot of issues. And from my observation, a lot of times they don't go. So how do you make your message fit everyone instead of that particular sector so that you can get to people that vote, win them over?
Well, so the message is that this city will never be as great as it can be until there's more equity in how we treat all of our neighborhoods. So it's actually in the best interest of those who live on the north side, who live downtown, that we address the huge disparities that exist on the south and west side. Because we haven't done that, and what we've seen is the increasing gap in inequality in the city, and it's had a huge impact on the quality of the city as a whole. So when we lose 200,000 residents from the south and west side, that's 200,000 potential taxpayers. So when you expand that exponentially to how much they would be paying in property taxes, that's money that we're not getting as a city. So when they leave, who's bearing the brunt of the remaining tax burden? It's those of us who are here. So what do? We have red light cameras, we have speed cameras, we have breathing cameras, we have you were driving on the wrong side of whatever cameras. We have higher taxes, higher property taxes. We have all of these things that are our attempts to plug the budget shortfall, and it hurts everyone. Also, the public safety issue, when we don't invest in those communities where we see the public safety issues, so maybe South Shore, maybe Lawndale, maybe Austin, wherever, when they go downtown, all of a sudden it becomes a problem. Not understanding that because we have not invested in those areas, that's why they're coming to other areas because they're looking for a way to survive. And so we all of a sudden see people complaining or really feeling like, oh my gosh, this is a big issue because now someone got robbed on Michigan Avenue or someone got their cell phone stolen in Old Town.
I guess my observation has been the haves against the have-nots. And when you see the haves, a lot of times, in a lot of cases, even in African-American communities, that's not my problem, I can't relate. Mm-hmm. And when you see that and you're running for mayor of a city, not necessarily a neighborhood or a ward, mm-hmm. the message should be how do you touch what affects them as well so that you can get their vote. So all I'm asking is how would you be able to spread that so that you would win?
By speaking to the issues that are relevant in the community. So our strategy is to get into every neighborhood, all 77 communities in the city. And we do that by not coming with a generic message, but because we talk to people and engage them, we can speak to what the issues are in Saguenay. We can speak to what the issues are in Headwich. The same way we already know what the issues are in South Shore and some of the other areas. And so we can speak to their issues, but our overall message, again, is a unifying message. It's a one Chicago. This is not, we cannot be two Chicagos. We can't continue on down that path. And so that's what we're saying, is that it's in our collective interest as one city to change direction and to do that in a drastic way. And I think based on how we've been received in all areas of the city, that it's resonating with people, because it's harder now to ignore what's happening in Inglewood. It's harder if you live in Andersonville to ignore what's happening in Humboldt Park, because now they're seeing it every day. And so I think that there's been they've been receiving that message fairly well so far.
Go ahead, Tom. Well, I'm probably most impressed with your presentation so far. And as Ken and I were talking before you started, since I had the privilege of introducing Harold Washington when he was running for Congress many years ago. Anyway, in reference to your talking about economic development on the ground level, why can you take the Lakeside Development Project and use that as an example and tie it into how you see yourself and those working with you getting the message out to the public through the mass media, and how that would tie into your program?
So when you refer to the Lakeside project, are you talking about the viability of the project or the details of the project?
I'm talking about the viability, not the viability per se of the project, but the fact that they're talking about long-term, 30, 40 years, 120,000 jobs developed between 79th and 92nd and the lakefront. The fact that they're talking about 3 high-rises, 20,000 units of housing, the first jobs out they've already started planning through McCaffrey. First jobs out are going to be construction jobs. Those are good paying jobs. How is a coalition for lakeside development, a grassroots group, going to get in on the action when Alderman Pope is trying to discombobulate them? McCaffrey and Pope are seemingly working together and the like. The powder, how do you fight the powder? And 10 words words.
So the way I feel about these development projects is, and I use this phrase that someone mentioned to me, I don't remember who, but they said if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And what we've seen with Lakeside, there are a couple of other projects that I have been involved in Inglewood, the rail yard expansion project, was that we were not at the table in an effective way. And to me, the current system makes sure that we cannot collectively come up with a strategy that's actually beneficial to the community. So what you have is, you have your aldermen saying one thing. You'll have 1, 2, 3, maybe 10 community groups who are all saying something a little bit different about what they want and what they should get. And everybody is under-requesting, right? So you'll have a $400 million project and we're getting, in fact, I'll just use the Inglewood example. It's a $250 million rail yard expansion project. And last week they had an article in the paper about how Norfolk Southern was giving a school $10,000 and everyone was applauding. And they're going to get $15,000 at some later date. So we're not asking, we're not demanding.
We're asking for crumbs.
Exactly. And we've been locked into a mindset where we don't have expectations and we don't have an agenda. So for me, with these projects, and with Lakeside in particular, if they're talking about how many jobs?
Long range, 120,000.
120,000 jobs. What skill sets do we need to make sure that our residents who live here have, so that when the jobs come out, they can apply and get the jobs just like that? That's human capital development. So that you can make sure that the project is actually working for the people who currently live here. Because what typically happens is they'll say, oh, it's 400 jobs. And then it's 400 people that come from outside of Chicago who have the skills for those jobs. And because we were not planning in advance, by the time the jobs get here, we don't have a pipeline of people who are steadily flowing into those jobs. So we have to be at the table in the planning process. We have to, first of all, break away from the crumbs mentality, where we're content to ask for $20,000 here, $100,000 there, and say that we actually have an agenda. If they say 120,000 jobs, what are the skills? Now, who do we partner with to make sure that we can get individuals trained in those particular skills? That's actually long-term development, and it makes sure that you can take advantage of the benefits of the development project. What it also does is it ensures that you can live here when it's done. So what typically happens is the project will be done, but by that time, everyone who was here has moved out to Harvey or Chicago Heights. Exactly, or maybe they're not around anymore at all. So the jobs mean that we can have the income level so that you can stay in the community, because what's going to happen is it's going to get more expensive. And without the emphasis on making sure that there's affordable housing, sufficient affordable housing, people get pushed out of the community simply because they can't afford it. So the whole jobs piece is not just to say we want people to have jobs, it's because if they have the job, they stay here, they raise their families here, and there's stability. And that's the approach that those who are at the table need to have. And so the issue is, what are the people at the table saying? Are they saying those things? Or are they content to get the $15,000 payout and say, oh, it's economic development? And I've seen that, unfortunately, in the work that I do around the city. I've seen it happen too often. And if I come in and say, well, 120,000 jobs, that's a $500 million workforce development initiative, and people tell me that I'm thinking too big, that's too much money. Someone who doesn't have a job will tell me I'm thinking too big and that's too much money. And that's a problem. So I think we need to change the mindset and make sure that those who are at the table are speaking in this way, because they're the ones that have the leverage to be able to make the best deal for the community.
Well, what would you do just to pinpoint the example, what would you do differently than what the mayor has done, and that is to say, put up $92 million in TIF monies to that developer to get started? And you know what TIF monies were supposed to be for.
Exactly. TIF money is your tax dollars. And those of you who live in the community should have priority over a developer. If you live in the community, you should have a say in how that project is being developed. So the first step is to make sure that what kind of council, advisory, or whomever, or whatever in your community is in place to make sure that they're monitoring the developer and be able to provide recommendations on what that development could and should look like. Now, it doesn't mean that if they say they want to build a high-rise, that the community says, no, you should build a convenience store instead. No. But it says that if they're going to invest in that community, if they want to actually develop in that community, that those who live there should have a say on what that development looks like. You should be able to talk about what the facade of the project looks like. You should be able to talk about what kinds of jobs you need to train people for in the community. You should be able to talk about if you think that it should have 2 high-rises instead of 3. That's the kind of input that you should have. A developer is not in, their bottom line is profit. They're not invested in your community, they're invested in making money. But if you live in the community, you have more at stake. So you should be at the table. There has to be some sort of guiding body that's not just an alderman, especially an alderman who's beholden to the mayor, that's helping to drive the development process.
So that kind of prefigured my question, and you said that TIFs are tax dollars. You know, here on 71st Street, we have prime examples of blight that could be remedied with TIF money if it were being used the way it was intended to by the state legislature. But those TIF accounts were drained to build a new school in the neighborhood. Can you talk about your sort of fiscal plan for how TIFs would be used under your mayoralty, and how you would actually move our municipal expenditures back under the regular budget?
Well, the easy answer is just to use TIFs for the purpose for which they were created, which is to address blight in the community. And we've moved so far away from that that most people don't know what TIFs were originally intended to do. And so for me, I think TIF reform requires that there's more accountability in how those dollars are spent and more local accountability. The mayor should not have carte blanche to determine how those TIF dollars are spent. If the community says that they want a certain thing, then that's actually what should drive how those dollars are spent. I think right now what happens is your alderman is the key person in determining how your TIF dollars are spent. So if your alderman is not advocating for some of the things that the community groups have said would be better alternatives, then you're going to get a school. And if you have an alderman that is not independent, that's beholden to the mayor, if the mayor calls and says, hey, we're going to put this school in your ward and we're going to use your TIF dollars, well, what are they going to say? So for me, it's about, at the top level, there definitely has to be more accountability in an open process. We need to actually be showing people how their TIF dollars are spent, and that's not just putting up 20,000 pages of PDFs online, which is what we currently do. And we need to make sure, again, that we're electing aldermen who are working on behalf of the community, who can make decisions to say, this is how we believe our TIF dollars should be spent, and then do that. Not that when they get the call from someone else, they're just going to go where the mayor directs them.
I have another question. So I'm generally very critical of Mayor Emanuel, with the exception of his work on transportation in the city. I think, you mentioned that we are a logistics and transportation hub. Our economy depends on moving goods and people around, a lot of them, and quickly. Can you talk about what your vision for transportation would be if you were mayor?
Well, so there's 2 levels. So one is our location as, we're probably located as a central transportation hub in the Midwest and actually internationally. And so I'm definitely in favor of preserving that. I think when we get down to the quality of life issue, one of the key issues is making sure that our services, our transportation as a service to the public, are properly maintained. That means that we should have, I actually propose revamping the way that we do our bus system and having shorter bus lines that are much more on time and much more consistent. A lot of what you see, and those of you who take public transportation now, at least in some of the busier corridors, you might the buses will come every 20 minutes, but sometimes it'll be 40 minutes, and then there'll be 3 buses piled on top of each other and show up, right? So that's been my experience. If you actually break up the lines and have shorter routes with those buses, they have a much shorter span that they're responsible for, and they're much more on time and much more consistent. So that's one thing that I want to do. I'm also interested in looking at alternative forms of transportation, and this is more innovative, but I like the idea of having ferry boats that can take you from downtown to the north side to the south side instead of using the streets. I think that's something that we could do and should do. I mean, I've seen it elsewhere and it seemed to work, so I'd be all for that. I also, there's some structural things that I would propose differently about the people that we employ in the transportation sector. I think one issue is the current way that they are shifted. I think is a little bit of a safety hazard. So I don't know if you know, well, you probably heard of the woman who was working overtime and on the blue line and fell asleep, drove the train up the steps. I think that's problematic, and we have to actually change the way that our specifically bus operators, train operators are shifted so that they're not fatigued when they're working, because it is a fairly intensive job. But overall, I think internationally preserving our location as a transportation hub, I mean, that's a regional issue. So in the tri-state region, there are things that we're doing. But I think at the ground level, we should be more innovative. I think shorter bus lines, and I think improving service quality. And the most important thing is making sure that it's affordable. I think we wasted money on Venture. It wasn't necessary. Nobody asked for it. And now private operators are profiting off of those of us who use public transportation. And now it's becoming more expensive. And I'll just add this last point, is that the thing that happens when we privatize our public assets, like our public transportation system, is that there's no accountability to the public. So private companies are accountable to their shareholders. And for them, the bottom line is profit. So once we privatize that public asset, they're not thinking about you as the person who's trying to get to work every day. They're thinking about how do we make sure that we make as much money this quarter as possible. And when we privatize, it never comes back into the hands of the public. So the rates right now, what is it, $2.25 for a line and no transfers? Who can afford that? I can't afford that, not every day. But then again, who is public transportation designed for? For people who don't want to drive, who perhaps can't afford a car, or don't want to pay gas, or don't want to get tickets every day so they don't drive. So the issue is maintaining service delivery and keeping it affordable, and for that we have to keep it in the hands of the public. And right now what the mayor has done in transportation-wise, at least for that specific area, is he's privatized our public transportation system, and that means it's only going to get more expensive for those of us who can't afford it.
I have something I never heard you say anything about crime. Now, I feel if you don't clean up the crime, all the ideas will go down the drain. Crime is high, real high.
Yes.
I lived in Inglewood 40 years. And I say Inglewood is good, but it's crime. Our teenagers, our youth don't have anything to do. It's just crime, 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 crime. And the mayor just looking past that.
Well, he's not looking past it. He's coming up with creative ways to repackage it.
Yeah.
So again, the issue of crime, I think, is it's a result of many things that have not happened. And I think it's more directly related to our inability to address the issues of poverty in our communities. And so again, this comes back to investment. When we don't invest, for example, in the park district or in our public schools, it means that kids don't have things to do, productive things to do when they're outside of school or when they're outside of work. And so I believe that we have to invest in those sorts of programs, and in our schools, in the park district, and also in youth employment. But I also believe this comprehensive jobs program in vital sectors, low barrier to entry sectors in the economy, is the best way to reduce crime, because when people are working, they're not doing other things. Or maybe they're too tired to commit crimes because they've been working all day. Or they have money to actually pay for themselves and their families. So a lot of the crime is not just because people in Inglewood happen to be criminals or people in Austin happen to be prone to crime. That's not the case. It's because they don't have enough options to where they can be productive members of society. And the best way to do that is by making sure that everyone who can work has access to a job. For younger people, they have to have other productive outlets. We also have to have resources. So a lot of kids that I work with they exhibit signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's because they see some things in their day-to-day life, in their community, things that we as adults probably couldn't handle. And yet, what are the resources in the community that help them to work through them? Things like using restorative justice. That's something that I'm a big proponent of, where they actually build accountability to the community instead of just locking you up or throwing you in jail. Restorative justice is actually something that builds people up. You understand what you did, but you pay it back into your community instead of taking you out of the community, and then when you come back, you can't do anything. So what are you going to do? You're going to go back to what you've been doing before. So something like restorative justice practice should be citywide. So things like peace circles. A lot of the outbursts and the anger that we see is because there are no resources for people to process through those emotions, through those issues. We have kids that I've worked with in the community that they experience violence or battery, and then they go to school, and we expect them to learn and be happy. No, without the resources, without fully funding our schools and funding those extracurricular activities, they don't have the resources to process through those emotions. And so we see outbursts with shootings and people acting out of anger, that's also contributing to the crime. So for us, we have to see crime as not a thing in and of itself. It's a multifaceted issue that's the result of several things that have not happened. And specifically, it's because we have not invested in eradicating poverty. We have not addressed the issues of poverty that impact everyone in the community. I can guarantee you, if this summer, if you have 20,000 young people in Inglewood and they're working, the crime rate will go down. It's happened. If they have activities that they're able to take part in, take advantage of, the crime rate will go down. But as long as this city, this leadership is more interested in manipulating statistics and telling you one thing while we know it's another, we're not gonna ever address the root of the issue. And so we have to have people who are interested in addressing the root of the issue, not interested in doing what's politically expedient and what's going to keep them in office until the next election cycle is over. And that's the circumstances that we have now.
Great. We have only time, unfortunately, for one more question because we have to be out of here by 12. So maybe, actually, Ida and Randy, why don't you both ask your questions? And maybe you can answer both of them in your response and close up. Does that sound good? Okay. So.
You go first. Oh, okay. I'm Ida Watanabe. I live with him, that guy.
They're very curious.
But excuse me, I was wondering about, I know you're very interested in education, and I was wondering what has happened to vocational education in this system, because we know that a lot of kids are going to college, and they shouldn't, but they can be trained for skills. I mean, they can develop skills, and I remember Chicago Vocational High School. They had a huge building where kids used to go there and learn trades or school, various kinds of skills. And why can't that be a part of our process, vocational education, so that kids come out with some skills that they can use in the current job market?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even Lane Tech had a technical
Right.
to it.
Right.
Before kids going to college and not going to college,
Yes, and that's actually a part of my
Wait.
Okay.
So Ida has a question about vocational education.
Yes,
Oh.
I'm trying to.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Randy. And my question is about housing. I think South Shore has great bones, but when I found out about a year ago that we have the highest number of voucher recipients within the city, that creates a neighborhood of, in essence, poverty. And so how can you have a viable neighborhood when there's no training, there's no programs? So I'm just curious about your ideas on housing in the city, and absentee landlords, because I think that plays into the whole crime issue. It plays into a lot of different issues. So just ideas on housing.
Slumlords. Yes.
I say absentee landlords,
Slum.
Slum, sorry. Specifically slum and absentees.
Yeah. So on the vocational education, that's actually a part of my education and workforce platform. What happened in this country is that maybe 60 years ago we decided that vocational education was not important. And so we started to remove it from our schools, and we began to push this narrative of college bound, college for all, everybody go to college. And so in other places around the world, they actually have very clear dual tracks where you can go to college, but you also have this vocational education system. So if you go to Germany, very clearly defined, and you see where their economy is. And so the mistake that we made, and this is, so the mayor is saying now, 100% college ready, 100% college bound, is wrong. It is not good policy. Because number one, with the expensive nature of college, and I am a living testament of what happens when you take out those student loans.
Right, and then you're in debt for...
Exactly, you're in debt, and also you're not necessarily working in an area that's paying you according to what you paid for college.
Yeah.
And so we actually have to make sure that in every school we have vocational education. We need people who can operate CNC machines. We need people who can be welders because there are jobs that they're trying to fill. And the example that I'll give is that I was working with a manufacturing company, and they had a job opening for a CNC operator. They were going to pay $75,000 for this position. They were also going to pay for your education up to a PhD if you just knew how to operate this machine. That job was vacant for 2 years. I almost went and got a certification, quit my job to get trained so I could take that job. So there are jobs in the economy, but because we walked away from vocational education, we're now finding that none of us have the skills for those jobs. And so the first step is to build a pipeline into those jobs and revitalize vocational education in our schools. And there's a good example of that. It's over in Pilsen. It's Blue 1647, run by an African-American gentleman named Emil Cambry, who's teaching people how to operate CNC machines, how to do 3D printing, how to do all of these forward-looking skills that we need to have if we want to be employed later on. So I'm in a different, complete other direction. The mayor wants everyone to go to college. You know, good luck. But if you want a diverse and strong economy, you have to understand that everyone is not going to go to college. And we need to have people that are trained in the jobs of the future. And if we don't do that, we're not going to see our economy improve. On the housing piece. So with people who get vouchers, so the key is that the voucher allows you to stay in the community, right? Because now you have housing. So again, the key is how to make sure that those individuals have access to jobs where they can work, where they can be contributors, where they can be stable. So it's not necessarily an issue of being in a community where there are a lot of people that have vouchers. It's an issue where there are no resources for those individuals to move beyond where they are economically. So when you find a job that you can pay for yourself and your children, you're less transient. You're less likely to see where you are as just a temporary facility and move on to the next thing, which means that you're not taking care of it as much. So again, for me, it does come down to what are the resources that exist in that community to support individuals who use housing vouchers, particularly in this area. Now, for our slumlords, I think it's a major problem, but I think that it comes down to advocacy at the ground level to hold them accountable. I think your aldermen should be involved in that process. I think they should be speaking on behalf of the community to say,
Bringing to the table, I know it's going to take time, but it will, slowly, gradually happen because people thought that he was going to, be there and help us, and help the communities. And later on, we found out that, it wasn't so.
well, I believe my responsibility is to be open and transparent. So everything that I stand for, I put out there. And I just do it in a very candid way. I have no interest in presenting an image of something. So the things that I talk about are the things that are important to me as someone who lives in the city, who hopes to have kids in the city. And so the only thing that I can ask or hope is that it resonates with people who happen to feel the way that I feel. The issue with our current mayor is that no one asked any questions. We just thought we were getting something, and then we realized 4 years later what we got. So everyone has buyer's remorse now. So if nothing else, we need to start asking those critical questions. So something like this where you can actually ask me questions, this is not scripted, there is no preparation. Those are the that's what helps you to decide who is actually authentic, who's actually in the interest of the city, and who's just out there because they have some other agenda. So my responsibility is to be very transparent, very open, to make myself accessible, and to just to speak from my heart, the things that I feel. That's all. I feel like that's all that I can really do. Okay.
Okay. Tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want to be part of the campaign or anything after this.
Yes. So there are cards on the table if you didn't get one. We need volunteers, people who are interested in volunteering in every capacity. If you want to be on field, if you want to do social media, if you want to do host an event like this, we've made it very easy. So on the card, it has all of our information on there. If you go to our website, amaraforchicago.com, that's F-O-R, it has a form where you can invite me to an event, you can host an event, you can sign up to be a volunteer, you can share your ideas, all of that through our website. We'll also be able to collect your information for our listserv, so when we send out our monthly newsletter that has updates on what we're doing. But we encourage you to do that very quickly because time is of the essence. We're on social media. Everything is Amara for Chicago. I learned that when your name is interesting, you have to be consistent so people can get it. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Foursquare, YouTube, Vimeo, all this stuff. It's all the same, Amara for Chicago. So, and please spread the word. Like and share the page on Facebook. Tell people, talk to people. That's the best marketing. It's actually word of mouth. If we don't have $20 billion to buy ads on TV, a conversation with someone, telling them what you heard and what you're thinking is the most effective way of getting the word out. So I would highly encourage you to do that as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.